Thank you for tuning into the Warren Christmas Village channel. On today's vlog, we're going to talk about sandbox campaigns, what they are, and some tips on how to run one. And please don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button as well as the notification bell. So I'm going to start with discussing the differences between a railroad campaign or a traditional railroad campaign versus a sandbox campaign. A railroad campaign follows a singular linear plotline narrative. A sandbox campaign is different than a railroad. A railroad is where you take everyone down a certain path and trajectory, and they don't really have much of a choice. A sandbox campaign is an open world format where players have the freedom of choice to basically do whatever they want. So for instance, if they decide they want to jump on a boat and run off to Waterdeep, they can. Think of a sandbox campaign as an open world format, kind of like in a video game where you can go and do whatever you want to do, except in a sandbox campaign, there is no limits to where player characters can go. There just isn't. It's not a video game, so it's the limits of the imagination, I guess, would be the how it works, or the limits of the mutual storytelling that is the D&D game. Now, I'm of the mindset that the minute you sit down and play a D&D game, you are indeed being railroaded. Sorry if you don't agree with that. Feel free to tell me all about how you feel down below. But in my opinion, if you're running a D&D game, if you as a player sit down with a DM, you have already consensually agreed to be railroaded in this fantasy role-playing game. It's the illusion of choice versus the actual choice. So sandbox is kind of the antithesis of a railroad. An advantage to a sandbox campaign is that many players can drop in and out of the storyline easily, and it's not really going to affect the flow. Remember, a sandbox campaign is a player-driven narrative, so let them decide what to do. However, I would still suggest you toss in random encounters. Not only is that the nature of old school D&D, but it just adds some fun randomness to the game as well. Sandbox campaigns can be very confusing for some players who like the concept of, here's my quest, here's what I go do, and then I get my reward from doing that quest. So sandbox campaigns can be a little trickier for your average player. So here are some tips that I recommend for helping you as a DM run a sandbox campaign. Have a lot of little miniature quests and mini adventures ready to go at a moment's notice in case the character decides to do something randomly, that you could squeeze that adventure into the plot narrative. Also, I would recommend you have some things going on in the background that the players don't necessarily know about. Allow the players to get a chance to find out about some of these things. Another tip I'd recommend for you as a DM is to try and get the players to have a central location somehow, so that way they're not running all willy-nilly about the world. Because that can sometimes happen. You have person A who wants to go over here, person B wants to go over that way, and person C wants to go yet a third direction. In this campaign that I'm currently running, the players all live and work at the inn. So they all have a central location. No one's decided to quit yet, which I think is kind of fun and curious. It must be a decent gig. And it also adds a great storyline for when I have players decide to come in and out of a game. Uh-oh, we might have we have a cat supervisor. Do you want to come in the camera? Every time I turn the camera on, you want to come up here while I... So in the current sandbox campaign that I'm running, the characters, if they've worked a shift at the end of the Welcome Wench, they roll an insight and an investigation check, their choice. And then they also get to roll a perception check to see if they find something at the underneath a table or maybe in the foyer or something like that. So what this allows me to do is give them the quest options. So if they don't necessarily have something that they want to do, they can have a little guidance and maybe go on a quest, which the characters did, and they came back with a cow. Remember, in a sandbox campaign, the world keeps progressing and moving along with or without the player's interaction. So for instance, if you have a bad guy cooking up something in the basement, and maybe that whatever he's cooking up is not going to be released into town for 3 weeks, if that's happening and the players find out about it sooner than later, Well, that's part of the sandbox campaign. They can choose the outcome of if this person is successful or not. However, let's say the players don't find out about this. Then in 3 weeks, that bad thing's going to pop out of that dude's basement. In my sandbox campaign, all of that is basically happening at once. For instance, there's goblins in Mrs. Merriweather's farm. The giant bugs at the Watkins farm. The cheesemaker's daughter just went missing. And then there's also other plots happening below level that the players don't know about. However, my players recently uncovered one of the plots before the bad guy was able to carry on with what he was doing. One of the characters just happened to get to sneak into the back room of Butcher Jebediah Jones and saw some things that he was not prepared to see. Once again, players will surprise you, so be prepared for that. The Jebediah Jones encounter is an encounter that I'm prepared for. I thought they would get a little higher level than they are, but I think they could handle what he has to offer if they were smart about it. And some of the players are pretty smart, so. It's the joy of a sandbox campaign. Flibberty gibbets! Please remember when player characters interact with the sandbox environment that their interaction should have real world consequences to that sandbox world. For instance, in the campaign I'm running, the players secretly just discovered that the Butcher Jebediah Jones is up to no good. And they now have an option to radically affect an event that's going to happen eventually. Another great tip that I recommend is don't forget to use movie plots as great narrative stories for quests or maybe some kind of horror story or whatever you want in your D&D game. Movie plots. They're great for storylines. Currently, I tossed in some Sweeney Todd action with the Butcher, and the reaction from the players was kind of funny. Same train of thought, maybe the players secretly find out that someone's up to no good in their town and have a way of preventing some tragedies from happening. For the current sandbox campaign that I'm running, I'm using the module, the Village Hamlet, which is an old TSR module from 1979. It has a great map. Many of the older school gamers will be familiar with the blue grids that we all used to have, the graph paper grids. This is an example of where the players are. The inn is located right here on the map, so you can see that they're very centrally located. This module is great for sandboxing because it doesn't really have anything going on. It's just a town. There's all sorts of detailed information. So for instance, if some players wanted to break into a certain farmer's house and search around under the floorboards, this module will tell you how many silver pieces they'll find, or maybe there's a magical dagger or something, who knows. Here's a map of the Village Hamlet module, which shows that we've got pretty much everything you would need to run a small town. You've got the farmers to the south, there's the inn, brewmaster, money changer, trader of goods, a temple, a church, some more tradesfolk. I put the butcher at 12, the village elder complex, there's the wizard's tower, the keep under construction, and the Druid's Grove to the south, which I thought was really curious that they would have a Druid's Grove in town. This map really does provide everything you would need for a basic town for a D&D game. So now let's have a little recap of our last campaign session. After defeating the giant Ankeg, the player characters decided to make their way back to Hamlet, with the giant insectoid body in the wagon and the cow that they had hustled from Elder Woman Watkins as an additional payment. They reached a certain point of the swampy forest and the nature went silent. All of a sudden, several humanoid frog-like creatures jumped out along with a couple giant frog pets and attacked the party. They were carrying nets and clubs and spears, and they noticed one of them was adorned in all sorts of body shiny objects, apparently scavenged from any sort of human settlement they could find. Player characters made quick work of the frog-like demi-humans, otherwise known in the D&D world as bullywogs, and managed to capture their leader and an additional warrior. The player characters made it back to town and were quite the spectacle with a giant bug and 2 frog-like human bullywogs captured. Player characters immediately went to Dr. Watkins, the apothecary, to collect their reward for ridding his family farm of the giant insect problem. The half-orc barbarian Fluffy, who had successfully removed the toxic acid sac, struck a deal with Dr. Watkins and gave him half of the acid in exchange for the doctor converting the acid to projectile-thrown weapons. The player characters offered the bullywugs to the doctor, but the doctor said he was not interested in trafficking of humanoid species. So the player characters took them to the village hall, where the authorities were immediately shocked that the bullywugs had moved into the area. Elder Jenkins, an elderly half-elf who had lived in Hamlet his entire life, mentioned that he hadn't seen bullywugs in the surrounding area in at least over 170 years, ever since he was a child. This upset the authorities, and they went out to do a search party to look for more. After dropping off the bullywugs, the player characters decided to go to the inn to see if the wench would maybe want to buy the cow. She gave them an offer that was a fair price, but they decided to go check and see if maybe Butcher Jebediah Jones would give them a better price. So they headed over to the butcher's shop. The butcher's shop was packed with customers, as the Butcher Jebediah Jones and his wife's meat pies were quite popular in town. It seemed like people just couldn't get enough. When the players entered, the butcher scowled at them, unhappy to see that they were not here to buy something. The normally crabby Butcher Jebediah Jones got even more crabby because he saw they were not here to buy anything and to try and sell him a cow. He gave them a really low-ball offer, and the players did not like that. So they started bringing up how they had heard about a fingernail being found in one of his meat pies, and how one of the other player characters had found a tooth inside of one of the meat pies. Butcher did not like this and immediately told the player characters they had to leave. During the kerfluffle, one of the player characters managed to sneak back into the workroom past the Butcher Jebediah Jones and his wife. They entered into a workroom which was basically a kitchen. Lots of flour and dough and tins for the meat pies and an oven baking them. And there was another doorway that led to the back. The player character noticed there was another door in this workroom and decided to go investigate further. Upon opening up the door, the player was not expecting to see what they did when they saw 6 humanoid bodies stripped of their skin, hanging from meat hooks like prosciutto ham. The player character immediately vomited, and once he regrouped, he saw that there was a cellar, and he decided to investigate further to see what else Butcher Jebediah Jones and his wife were up to. He safely went down to the cellar and saw a giant meat grinder with some additional corpses lying about. Then he saw another door that apparently led to some sort of underground catacomb, and he opened it up, and it was filled with darkness. Being dragonborn, he couldn't see in the dark, so he lit a torch and decided to go further investigate. The catacomb led him out to above ground, similar to what they experienced behind the inn, except this time they ended up near the outskirts of the Elder Jenkins compound. Meanwhile, the other players were still harassing the butcher and upsetting his business. Several of the customers had decided to leave and were looking at the player characters strangely. It wasn't until the butcher and his wife told them a third time to leave and grabbed some knives that the player characters got the point and decided to leave. The player characters returned to the inn, whereupon the bard, who had snuck into the back, also reunited with the players and told them of the gruesome details that they had found. So we leave the player characters at the end of this session having found out the gruesome details of what truly is going into Jebediah Jones's meat pies. And I think a couple of the player characters have now become vegetarians. They're a little paranoid right now. It's kind of an Alfred Hitchcock moment. They're not really sure who to trust. I was kind of going for more Sweeney Todd, but it's turned into a little bit of Alfred Hitchcock, which I'm just going to go with. It's a movie plot. Maybe Norman Bates is going to show up. with his undead. Thank you for tuning into the Warren Christmas Village channel. Please don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button or the notification bell, so that way you'll be notified next time I upload a tutorial or a vlog of our next D&D campaign session. Good luck with running your next sandbox campaign. I hope these tips gave you some insight